Chapter 1. The feather was supposed to float. That was the sum total of Leo Vance's ambition for the afternoon. Not to make it dance a jig like Hannah Abbott's, or to make it trace perfect figure eights in the air like Alara Finch's, but simply to make it lift from the scarred surface of his desk. One quiet, obedient, non-explosive levitation. It was a laughably low bar for a first-year student at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, yet for Leo, it felt like trying to summit Everest in his school shoes. He gripped his wand, a stick of unremarkable vine that felt less like a conduit for magic and more like an uncooperative twig. His knuckles were white. Around him, the Charms classroom was a scene of gentle, focused success. Sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, streamed through the high-arched windows, illuminating a score of gently bobbing feathers. Professor Flitwick, perched atop a stack of books, chirped encouragement. "Excellent, Mr. Thomas." A lovely swish and flick. "Mind your enunciation, Miss Patil. It's gar, not jar." Leo's palms were slick with sweat. He could feel the familiar, dreadful thrumming behind his eyes, the low-grade hum of power without purpose, like an engine revving in neutral. It was always there, a constant companion since his magic had first erupted a year ago, not with a gentle spark but with a cataclysm that had turned his family's garden shed into a crater of smoking splinters. That incident had earned him a letter from Hogwarts, but it had also branded him. He wasn't just a muggle-born. He was a magical catastrophe waiting to happen. Academic probation. The words were practically stitched into the lining of his Gryffindor robes. Across the aisle, Alara Finch watched him, her brow furrowed in academic disapproval. Her feather was a model of precision, hovering exactly 12 inches above her textbook, as steady as if it were pinned to the air itself. Her movements had been crisp, her incantation a perfect, melodic syllable. She was a Ravenclaw, and it showed in every line of her posture, erect, attentive, and radiating an aura of absolute certainty. She looked at Leo's trembling wand the way a master horologist might look at a sundial crudely drawn in crayon. "Just breathe, Vance," she muttered, not out of kindness, but with the weary impatience of someone forced to witness gross incompetence. "It's a simple kinetic charm, not a continental displacement hex." Leo ignored her, his focus narrowing on the small, white feather. He saw it not as an object, but as his final exam. Pass, and he was a wizard. Fail, and he was just a freak who broke things. He took a shaky breath, mimicking the swish and flick he'd seen 100 times. "Wingardium Leviosa," he whispered. The hum behind his eyes surged into a roar. The magic didn't flow down his arm and out his wand in a gentle stream. It detonated from his core. For a split second, the world went silent. The sunlight seemed to bend. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing in on him with an almost physical weight. The feather did not float. It vanished in a flash of incandescent white light, instantly incinerated into a puff of superheated ash. A shockwave of force, utterly silent, erupted from the spot where it had been. It slammed into the window behind Professor Flitwick's desk. The ancient glass didn't just shatter. It exploded outwards in a shower of glittering dust, each mote catching the sun like a dying star. The very air in the room seemed to stretch and snap back into place, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated in the students' bones. Silence descended, thick and absolute. Every eye was on Leo. Hannah Abbott's feather dropped onto her book with a soft plop. Professor Flitwick, his face pale, slowly lowered himself from his stack of tomes. Alara Finch was staring, not at Leo, but at the empty space above his desk, her mouth slightly agape. For the first time since he'd met her, her perfect composure was gone, replaced by a look of horrified fascination. "What was that?" she breathed, her voice barely audible. The arithmancy of that casting was impossible. The power curve was vertical. Leo couldn't answer. His ears were ringing. The acrid smell of ozone and burnt magic filled his nostrils. He looked at his wand, half expecting it to be a charred ruin, but it was pristine. The power inside him receded, leaving him feeling hollowed out and shaky, the adrenaline-fueled aftermath of a near-miss car crash. "Mr. Vance," Professor Flitwick said, his voice regaining some of its squeaky authority, though it was laced with a tremor of shock. "The headmaster's office. At once." The walk to the headmaster's office was a well-trodden path of shame for Leo. He knew every loose flagstone, every gargoyle that seemed to sneer at him as he passed. This time, however, was different. The whispers that followed him were not of simple mockery, but of genuine fear. He had done more than ruin a lesson. He had broken something fundamental. He hadn't just overpowered a spell. He had violated it. He reached the stone gargoyle guarding the entrance. Under Dumbledore, the password had always been a type of sweet. But the new headmaster was a different creature altogether. Dr. Stephen Strange was a name that inspired awe and unease in equal measure. An American, a former surgeon, a wizard of a kind no one had ever seen before, one who wore strange blue robes and a cape that seemed to have a mind of its own. Leo took a guess based on the rumors. The Hippocratic Oath? The gargoyle remained stubbornly inanimate. He tried again, his voice trembling. First, do no harm? With a low groan of stone on stone, the gargoyle slid aside, revealing the spiraling stone staircase. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs with every step he took. Expulsion wasn't a possibility anymore. It was an inevitability. He'd be sent back to the Muggle world, a boy with a secret too big and too dangerous to keep, doomed to a life of looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next inevitable explosion. He knocked on the heavy oak door. Enter, a calm, resonant voice commanded from within. Leo pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was not what he expected. Dumbledore's whimsical, cluttered study was gone. In its place was a chamber that was part monastic sanctuary, part arcane laboratory, and part astronomical observatory. Towering bookshelves still lined the circular walls, but the familiar titles were interspersed with leather-bound tomes whose spines were marked with glowing, geometric runes that shifted and reformed as he watched. In the center of the room, where a desk should have been, a vast, intricate orrery of interlocking silver and gold rings spun slowly in midair, miniature planets and stars gliding along silent, predetermined paths. Strange artifacts rested on pedestals. A glowing green gem pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, and a golden eye-shaped amulet sat on a velvet cushion, seemingly watching the room. The air hummed with a power that felt ancient and cosmic, making the chaotic thrum inside Leo feel like a child's tantrum in the face of a silent, ageless god. And behind it all, standing before a vast, floor-to-ceiling window that looked out not onto the Hogwarts grounds, but into a swirling nebula of impossible colors, was Headmaster Strange. He was a tall man, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. The high collar of his blue robes was immaculate, and a fantastic red cloak with a life of its own was draped over his shoulders. He turned, and Leo felt himself pinned by the man's gaze. His eyes were a piercing, intelligent gray, and his hands, which he held clasped behind his back, bore a web of faint, silvery scars. Leo Vance, Strange said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a baritone, calm and analytical, entirely devoid of the anger Leo had expected. First year. Gryffindor. Conditional acceptance due to a significant and uncontrolled manifestation of latent magical abilities. You turned your uncle's prize-winning petunias into a flock of sentient and reportedly quite aggressive garden gnomes. Leo swallowed hard. They said sorry before they dismantled his lawnmower. A flicker of something, not quite amusement, but perhaps academic interest, crossed Strange's face. Indeed. Professor Flitwick has just sent an owl, a rather frantic one, describing your latest experiment in kinetic energy transference. You atomized a feather and destructured a 16th century enchanted window. He seems to believe you are a danger to yourself and others. Leo mumbled, staring at his shoes. I'm sorry, Headmaster. I don't know why it happens. I try to do it small, but it always comes out big. Strange walked towards him, his movements fluid and precise. The red cloak billowed slightly, though there was no breeze. He circled Leo like a predator assessing novel prey. Show me your wand, he commanded. Leo numbly held it out. Strange didn't take it. He simply examined it, his eyes narrowed in concentration. Vinewood. Dragon heartstring core. 12¼ inches. A standard, if respectable, focusing tool. It's a fine instrument, Mr. Vance. But you are attempting to play a symphony on a penny whistle. Leo stared, confused. Sir, tell me what you did, Strange said, his voice sharp, insistent. Do not tell me what you tried to do. Tell me what you did. From the moment you began the incantation. Describe the energy flow. No one had ever asked him that before. Teachers always asked what he'd done wrong with the wand movement or the pronunciation. I felt it. The hum. It's always there. But when I said the words, it was like I pulled a plug and everything came rushing out at once. It didn't feel like it went through the wand. It felt like it went through everything. The desk. The air. Me. Strange nodded slowly, a deep, thoughtful expression on his face. You bypassed the user interface. The what? The headmaster gestured around the room, at the spinning orrery and the glowing runes. Wizarding magic, as it has been taught for centuries, is a marvel of refinement and safety. Wands, incantations, somatic components, they are a highly sophisticated user interface. They allow a practitioner to access the fundamental forces of the multiverse through a series of preset commands and macros. Wingardium Leviosa doesn't make a feather float. It executes a tiny, localized command to temporarily negate the gravitational constant for a specific set of coordinates and mass. It's elegant. It's safe. It's rigid. He paused, his gaze locking onto Leo's again, and the intensity in his eyes was unnerving. But you, Mr. Vance, through some combination of raw power, lack of formal training, and sheer desperation, did not use the interface. You accessed the source code directly. Leo felt a chill crawl up his spine. The source code. The raw, chaotic, infinitely powerful, and infinitely dangerous fabric of reality itself, Strange said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. What your professors see as a failure of control, I see as an unprecedented success in brute force magical application. You did not ask reality to lift the feather. You told it to, in its own native language. And reality, not being accustomed to such rudeness, overreacted. You are not a poor wizard, Mr. Vance. You may, in fact, be the most powerful first year to ever walk these halls. Leo's head spun. Powerful? Him. He was the boy who couldn't light a candle without singeing off his eyebrows. He was the boy whose name was a synonym for magical disaster. But I can't control it, he stammered. Precisely, Strange said, a grim line forming on his lips. And that is why you are not a danger, Mr. Vance. You are a liability of cosmic proportions. A child swinging a sledgehammer in a room made of spun glass. He turned and walked back towards the window overlooking the nebula. Your little outburst in charms did more than break a window. He raised a hand, his fingers forming a complex, glowing geometric pattern in the air. The vast window shimmered, and the view of the swirling cosmos dissolved, replaced by a real-time image of the charms classroom. It was empty now, the evening light casting long shadows. But in the center of the room, exactly where Leo's desk had been, the air was wrong. It was a slight distortion, a barely perceptible shimmer, like heat haze on a summer road. But it was a cold haze, a patch of reality that seemed thinner, more fragile than the space around it. As Leo watched, a mote of dust drifted into the shimmer, and for an infinitesimal moment, it seemed to stretch, to exist in two places at once before vanishing completely. Every time your magic erupts in this uncontrolled manner, Strange explained, his voice grave, you are not just casting a spell. You are punching a hole in the dimensional membrane. Most are microscopic. They heal and seal themselves within moments. But today was different. The sheer, paradoxical nature of it, infinite power channeled into a finite, simple spell, created something more stable. A tear. Leo felt a wave of nausea. He had done that. He had torn reality. It's a very small tear, Strange continued, his eyes fixed on the shimmer. Invisible to most. But the universe abhors a vacuum. And it especially abhors a paradox. Suddenly, the headmaster fell silent. His posture stiffened. The red cloak on his shoulders stirred, its collar rising slightly as if sensing a threat. Strange's eyes, which had been analytical, narrowed with a sharp, sudden focus that was genuinely alarming. He was no longer looking at the image of the classroom, but through it, as if sensing something far beyond the castle walls. What is it? Leo asked, his voice a whisper. Strange didn't answer immediately. He took a half step back from the window, his hand drifting towards the golden amulet on the pedestal. The air in the office grew cold. The gentle hum of the arcane artifacts faltered, replaced by an unnerving silence. "The problem, Mr. Vance," Strange said, his voice a low, dangerous murmur, his gaze fixed on that tiny patch of distorted air in the empty classroom, "is that when you tear a hole in the wall between worlds." He paused, and a flicker of genuine, primal alarm crossed his face. Something on the other side invariably looks back. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Stone. The first sign that something was fundamentally wrong with Hogwarts wasn't a scream or an explosion. It was the marmalade. Leo was trying to be invisible at the Gryffindor table, a feat made easier by the sheer, boisterous volume of his housemates. He kept his head down, shoulders hunched, and focused on the simple mechanical act of spreading marmalade on a piece of toast. He'd just finished, the sticky orange preserve glistening under the enchanted ceiling's morning light, when a seventh-year prefect, Percy Weasley's spiritual successor in every conceivable way, clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Chin up, Vance. Can't let one bad charms lesson get you down." Leo flinched, nearly dropping his knife. He mumbled something noncommittal and watched the prefect move on. When he looked back down at his plate, his toast was bare. The jar of marmalade was full, the knife beside it clean. He stared, his heart beginning a frantic, thudding rhythm against his ribs. He remembered spreading it. He could almost still feel the sticky residue on his fingers, yet there was none. He cautiously picked up the knife again. As his hand moved towards the jar, he noticed a faint, shimmering distortion in the air around it, like heat haze on a summer road. He spread the marmalade, his eyes fixed on the toast. It was done. He looked up, scanned the hall, then looked back down. The toast was bare. The jar was full. The knife was clean. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, washed over him. This was his fault. That flash of light, that feeling of tearing something in Professor Flitwick's class, it hadn't just been a backfired spell. It had broken something. Now the breaks were starting to show. Across the Great Hall, he wasn't the only one noticing the glitches. A Hufflepuff first year screamed in frustration as a house elf repeatedly poured pumpkin juice into her already full goblet, the liquid vanishing a second before it overflowed, only for the elf to begin pouring again in a perfect, maddening loop. Peeves the poltergeist was cackling with glee, pelting Slytherins with water balloons that seemed to pop a full second before he threw them, the splash appearing in midair and drenching the students, followed by the balloon itself sailing harmlessly past. The strangest sight was the bloody Baron, who flickered. For a moment, he was the spectral, silver-stained ghost everyone knew, and the next, he was a solid, living man in archaic robes, his face contorted in a silent, centuries-old scream before he dissolved back into his ghostly form. The temporal stutter was so violent it left a chill in the air that had nothing to do with his spectral nature. "Fascinating," a crisp voice said from beside him. Leo jumped. Alara Finch had appeared at his elbow, her Ravenclaw robes immaculate. She wasn't looking at him, but at the Hufflepuff girl trapped in the pumpkin juice loop. Her sharp, intelligent eyes were narrowed in analysis, not fear. A pristine, leather-bound notebook was open in her hands, and a self-inking quill was scribbling furiously. "Temporal displacement with localized causality failure," she muttered to herself, her quill dancing across the page. "The Baron's manifestation suggests a chronoton field degradation, but the effect is inconsistent. It's not a uniform decay." She finally turned to him, her gaze as piercing as a freshly sharpened hawk's talon. "You were in Flitwick's class yesterday, weren't you, Vance?" Leo's mouth went dry. Yeah. So were you." "Indeed," Alara said, tapping her quill against her chin. "And I saw your Wingardium Leviosa. Or rather, the uncontrolled detonation of raw magic that you passed off as an attempt at the levitation charm. Its energy signature was chaotic, unstructured. It lacked any of the harmonic resonance required for stable spellcasting." She spoke of his magic the way a mechanic might speak of a faulty engine, a collection of parts assembled incorrectly. "It just got away from me," Leo mumbled, his face burning with shame. He wanted the stone floor to swallow him whole. "Got away from you," she repeated, a sliver of academic disdain in her voice. Magic isn't a runaway hippogriff, Vance. It is a system of quantifiable energies governed by precise laws. Your accident coincided with the onset of these anomalies. A correlation too significant to be coincidental. Before Leo could form a defense, she had already turned back to her observations, dismissing him as little more than a data point in her analysis. He was the problem, and she was the one taking notes. The weight of his guilt pressed down, heavier than ever. He wasn't just a bad wizard. He was a walking natural disaster. He had broken Hogwarts. The feeling of being a contaminant followed him all day. Every flicker of a torch, every stare that changed direction with a little too much enthusiasm, felt like a personal accusation. He tried to get to Transfiguration after lunch, a class held in a remote classroom on the 7th floor. The corridor was long and lined with tapestries of goblin rebellions. He'd walked it a dozen times. He walked past a tapestry depicting Gornik the gluttonous leading a charge. The stone beneath his feet felt solid. He heard his own footsteps echoing, a familiar rhythm. But then he heard another set of footsteps, his own, coming from ahead of him. He froze. The echo was wrong. It wasn't an echo. It was a prelude. Shaking his head, he pressed on. He passed the Gornik tapestry again. He stopped, his blood turning to ice. That wasn't right. He turned and walked back the way he came. He passed a suit of armor, its gauntlet raised in a permanent salute. He kept walking, the corridor stretching on. In the distance, he saw the Gornik tapestry. He was trapped. The corridor had looped back on itself, sealing him in an impossible piece of geometry. Panic began to claw at his throat. He ran, his sneakers slapping against the ancient stone. He ran past the armor, past the tapestry, past a window showing a perpetually gray sky, and then past the armor and the tapestry again. He was a mouse in a stone maze that had no exit. This is illogical. The voice cut through his panic. He skidded to a halt and turned. Alara Finch was standing by the suit of armor, her wand out. Her expression wasn't one of fear, but of profound, intellectual offense. The spatial dimensions of this hallway are folding back on themselves in a non-Euclidean loop, she declared, as if scolding the castle itself. Standard countercharms are having no effect. Finite incantatum. A jet of blue light shot from her wand and struck the wall, fizzling out with a pathetic little hiss. The corridor remained stubbornly looped. See, she said, gesturing with her wand. The effect isn't a spell. It's a fundamental breakdown of the localized reality. It's like trying to fix a corrupted document by shouting at the typewriter. Leo stared at her. You got trapped too? I was attempting to map the temporal distortions, she said, her tone suggesting it was the most normal activity in the world. I triangulated the epicenter of the highest chronoton interference to this sector. It seems I was correct. She looked at him, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than academic curiosity crossed her face. It looked suspiciously like blame. The distortions are stronger around you. It's not my fault. Leo burst out, the words raw with a mix of fear and indignation. Isn't it? She countered, taking a step closer. Your magic is the source of the paradox. Immense potential energy with zero regulatory structure. It's a magical singularity, a black hole of intention. You ripped a hole in the fabric of things, and now, something is leaking through. As she spoke, the air grew cold. A shimmering, oil-slick iridescence bled into the air between them. It coalesced into a shape, a ghostly, translucent echo of a student, their face a blur of motion, their limbs trailing behind them like smoke. The apparition walked straight through the Gornik tapestry, its silent passage causing the threads of the fabric to fray and age 100 years in a second. Alara took an involuntary step back, her composure finally cracking. What was that? I don't know, Leo whispered, his voice trembling. He felt a strange pull from the apparition, a resonance with the chaotic hum of his own magic. It felt hungry. Before either of them could react, a circle of brilliant, fiery orange light tore open in the middle of the corridor, showering the stone with harmless sparks. It spun like a Catherine wheel, revealing not the wall behind it, but a wood-paneled office filled with bizarre artifacts and floating astronomical models. Headmaster Strange stepped through the portal as casually as if he were stepping over a puddle. He wore charcoal robes, impeccably tailored, and the cloak of levitation was settled on his shoulders, its collar high and proud. His eyes, sharp and impossibly ancient, swept over the corridor, the fading apparition, and finally settled on the 2 first years. "Well," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to absorb the silence. "This is suboptimal." He gestured for them to step through the portal. "My office. No. The universe is bleeding into my school, and I find my prime suspect and my best diagnostician trapped in a hallway. The irony is not lost on me, but my patience is." Leo had never been in the headmaster's office before. He'd expected Dumbledore's old menagerie of silver instruments and portraits of sleeping predecessors. He was not prepared for this. The circular room was a nexus of impossibilities. The grand window behind the desk didn't look out over the Hogwarts grounds, but into a swirling nebula of purple and gold, distant galaxies spinning in silent majesty. Shelves were filled not with books, but with objects that defied logic. A Mobius strip made of glowing water, a tesseract that gently folded and unfolded itself, an astrolabe whose rings spun in opposition to the flow of time. The entire room hummed with a quiet, immense power that made the magic of Hogwarts feel like a flickering candle next to a star. Strange strode to his desk, which was a single, massive slab of obsidian that seemed to absorb the light. He waved a hand, and a 3-dimensional shimmering map of the castle appeared in the air between him and the students. Red, angry blotches pulsed in various locations. Hogwarts is built on a convergence of ley lines, a place where the veil between worlds is naturally thin, Strange began, his tone that of a university professor delivering a lecture he'd given 1,000 times. "It is, for the most part, stable. Or it was until yesterday." His piercing gaze fell on Leo, who felt his insides shrink. "Your backfired spell, Mr. Vance, was not a simple miscalculation of wand movement and incantation. Traditional magic, the kind taught here for a millennium, is a user interface. A set of elegant but rigid protocols for accessing universal energies. What you did was bypass the interface entirely. You wrote a line of raw code. A very sloppy, very powerful line of code that punched a microscopic hole in the dimensional wall." He pointed a long, slender finger at Leo. "You created a paradox. A magical event of immense power, born from absolute incompetence. And paradoxes, Mr. Vance, attract predators." Strange gestured to the floating map. "What you are experiencing are the feeding ripples of a creature I have encountered before. It is called a glimmer fiend. It doesn't live in a dimension, but in the cracks between them. It is drawn to paradoxes the way a shark is drawn to blood in the water. It doesn't eat matter or energy. It eats causality. It consumes logic, consistency, the very laws of cause and effect." Alara, who had been listening with rapt, horrified attention, finally found her voice. "So the temporal loops, the spatial folds, that's its digestion process?" "An astute observation, Miss Finch. 10 points to Ravenclaw," Strange said with a dry, humorless smile. "Yes. It is grazing on the castle's reality. The longer the hole remains open, the more it will feed. The glitches will become fractures. The fractures will become breaks. Eventually, Hogwarts and everyone in it will be digested into a meaningless soup of disconnected moments and impossible spaces, and then erased from the timeline altogether as if it never existed." The sheer, cosmic scale of the threat was overwhelming. Leo felt dizzy. He had done this. A single stupid spell, and he was going to unmake his entire world. Can you fix it?" Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You're the Sorcerer Supreme." He'd heard the whispers, the awestruck rumors from older students who knew of the Headmaster's life before Hogwarts. "I can cauterize the wound, yes," Strange conceded, his fingers steepling before him. "But sealing the rift requires a specific key. The Glimmer Fiend was drawn by the unique frequency of your paradoxical magic. Trying to close the hole with my own, which is based on order, intellect, and absolute control, would be like trying to pick a lock with a sledgehammer. The rift would shatter, tearing a gateway large enough for the Glimmer Fiend to come through entirely. The only energy signature that can interface with the tear, guide the creature back through it, and seal it from our side is yours." The silence that followed was absolute. The soft hum of the impossible artifacts on the shelves seemed to grow louder. Leo stared at the headmaster, his mind refusing to process the words. The power he hated, the chaotic curse that made him a pariah, the very thing he wished every day he could be rid of, was the only solution. Alara was the first to break the silence. Headmaster, with all due respect, that is the most catastrophically irresponsible plan I have ever heard. His magic is a magical blunderbuss. You cannot perform dimensional surgery with a blunderbuss. Correct, Miss Finch, Strange said, turning his gaze to her. Which is why he will not be the surgeon. He is the scalpel. You are the hand that will guide it. Alara's jaw dropped. Me? I am a first year. My understanding of arithmancy is purely theoretical, and my grasp of temporal mechanics is rudimentary at best. And yet, Strange countered, his voice cutting through her protests, you possess the single most organized, logical, and encyclopedic mind in this school, regardless of age. You see the system, the rules. He is the chaos. To create the stable, controlled paradox we need to lure the Glimmer Fiend, we require both. Your knowledge must provide the framework, the equation. His power will provide the energy, the solution to that equation. He looked between the two of them, Leo, pale and terrified, and Alara, flushed with indignation and intellectual horror. They were oil and water, chaos and order, a walking disaster and a living textbook. Strange walked over to a pedestal in the corner of the room. On it rested a sphere of shimmering crystal. As he approached, the image inside swirled, resolving into a live feed of the Hogwarts library. Books were flying from shelves at random. Pages were turning to sections that hadn't been written yet, and the ghost of the Grey Lady was caught in a 2-second loop, perpetually asking a student where the diadem was. The red blotch on Strange's map over the library pulsed ominously. The Glimmer Fiend's influence is consolidating there, the headmaster said, his back to them. It has found a nexus of stored information, potential timelines, histories, paradoxes in print, and it is beginning to feed more aggressively. He turned back, his expression grim, his eyes boring into them. The time for lectures was over. Your first lesson begins now. You will go to the library. You will not fight it. You will not try to banish it. You will observe it, analyze its behavior, and report back to me. Miss Finch, you will document the specific nature of its reality distortions. Mr. Vance, he said, his gaze locking onto Leo, you will try, for the first time in your life, not to fear the chaos inside you, but to feel it, to listen to what it resonates with. He held up a hand, a complex pattern of golden energy forming between his fingers. Do not fail. The fate of this school now rests on the shoulders of a magical time bomb and a walking encyclopedia. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment, a heavy cloak of responsibility settling over them. And neither of you, he added with a chilling finality, has the faintest idea where to begin. Chapter 3. The Geometry of Fear. The headmaster's office was not a room. It was a suggestion. The circular walls were a slow-moving orrery of constellations Leo didn't recognize, their light casting long, skeletal shadows from furniture that seemed to exist only at the edge of his vision. At its center, beneath a swirling vortex of emerald and gold that served as a ceiling, stood Headmaster Strange, Leo, and a visibly vibrating Alara Finch. The air tasted of ozone and old parchment. Forget your wands, Strange began, his voice cutting through the ambient cosmic hum. He gestured dismissively, and the holly and phoenix feather in Leo's hand felt suddenly childish, a toy. They are an elegant solution to a rudimentary problem. Think of them as a calculator. They allow anyone with a spark of talent to solve for X without understanding the equation. Incantations, wand movements, they are a pre-programmed user interface. Tidy, predictable, and for our current predicament, utterly useless. Alara's hand shot up, a motion so ingrained from years of academic excellence that she didn't seem to realize she'd done it. Headmaster, with all due respect, Phileas Flitwick's Compendium of Foundational Charms explicitly states that precise somatic and verbal components are the cornerstones of stable spellcasting. To neglect them is to invite catastrophic failure. Strange fixed her with a look that was not unkind, but carried the weight of ages. Miss Finch, you have mistaken the menu for the meal. The Glimmer Fiend is not a rogue bludger, or a miscast bat bogey hex. It doesn't operate on the rules your textbooks so beautifully codify. It eats the rules. It dines on paradox and your rigid, logical magic is a 5-course meal of if-then statements it can invert and consume. He turned his gaze to Leo, and the full force of his intellect felt like a physical pressure. Vance, you are the opposite. You are a walking, talking, catastrophic failure. You are a paradox made flesh. Immense potential, zero methodology. When you cast a spell, you aren't running a program. You're smashing the keyboard and hoping for the best. That, for once, is our advantage. Leo swallowed, his throat dry. So, you want me to mess up? I can do that. I'm great at that. No, Strange said, his tone sharpening with impatience. I want you to stop thinking like a wizard. I want you to start thinking like a force of nature. Your magic isn't a tool you wield. It's a part of your biology as fundamental as your heartbeat. You don't cast a spell to make your heart beat, do you? You simply are. He led them to a clear space on the floor, which now resembled a placid, dark lake reflecting the star-dusted ceiling. We're not going to practice spells. We're going to practice intent. Eldritch magic, what your predecessors might have crudely termed raw magic, is not about saying the right words. It is about imposing your will upon the fabric of reality. It is geometry, physics, and philosophy expressed as power. Strange's hands began to move, not in the swish and flick of a wizard, but with the precise, deliberate motions of a surgeon. A thread of golden light appeared between his fingers. He wove it, folded it, and shaped it until a shimmering, complex mandala of light spun in the air before him. It was beautiful and terrifying, a diagram of a concept Leo couldn't begin to grasp. This, Strange said, is a shield. Not because I whispered a word of protection, but because I have visualized, in every conceivable dimension, the concept of impenetrable. I have bent space-time into a wall. Your turn, Vance. The mandala dissolved. Strange looked at him. No want. Close your eyes. I don't want a shield. I want light. Not lumos. Just light. The concept of it. Visualize a single photon. Understand its wave-particle duality. Feel the energy it would release. Will it into existence. Leo closed his eyes. His heart hammered against his ribs. Just light. It sounded so simple. He pictured the warm glow of the lamp on his bedside table back home. He pictured the sun. He thought of the word lumos and tried to push it away. He focused, channeling that familiar, terrifying energy that always coiled in his gut. He felt a warmth on his palm. He opened his eyes. A sputtering, angry little ball of fire, the size of a canute, hovered over his hand. It spat a tiny ember that singed the sleeve of his robe, and then it exploded with a sharp crack, leaving behind the smell of burnt hair and ozone. Alara flinched back, pulling out her own wand instinctively. He could have taken his hand off, but he didn't, Strange noted, his expression unreadable. Interesting. You aimed for light and produced heat and sound. Inefficient, but a result nonetheless. You are leaking energy across the spectrum. You are not a finely tuned laser, Vance. You are a bursting dam. The problem is, you've spent your whole life trying to plug the cracks. I need you to learn how to direct the flood. For the next several hours, that's what they did. Strange didn't give him a single spell. Instead, he presented Leo with abstract concepts. Show me emptiness, he'd command. Leo would focus, and the air in front of him would grow cold, frost forming on the stone floor. Show me connection, he'd demand. A sticky, translucent thread of energy would stretch between Leo's hands before snapping with a mournful twang. Alara stood to the side, her initial skepticism slowly morphing into a horrified fascination. She took notes furiously in a small leather-bound book, her quills scratching against the parchment. The kinetic energy transfer is wildly disproportionate to the intended effect, she muttered at one point. It's like he's trying to open a door by detonating the whole wall. Leo's frustration mounted with every failure. The pressure was immense. He wasn't just trying to learn. He was trying to save the school, trying to prove he wasn't a worthless squib with a power surge. He could feel Strange's piercing gaze, feel Alara's judgment. He was a clumsy oaf playing with cosmic fire, and he was going to get everyone burned. I can't do it, he finally burst out, After an attempt to create a simple sphere of solid force resulted in a shockwave that rattled the teacups on Strange's desk. Every time I try to focus, it just gets bigger. It's too much. I can feel it all, and I can't hold it. Strange stepped forward, his expression severe. Then stop trying to hold it. You're trying to cup the entire ocean in your hands. Your will is the cup, and it will always be too small. The secret, Mr. Vance, is not to contain the ocean. It is to tell a single drop of water where to go. The simplicity of the words cut through Leo's panic. A single drop of water. Again, Strange commanded. Light. But this time don't think of the sun. Don't think of a lamp. Think of the smallest possible thing. A grain of sand. A mote of dust. And make it shine. Leo closed his eyes, his breath hitching. He ignored the roaring ocean of power inside him. He searched within the chaos for something small, something manageable. He pictured a single, tiny speck floating in an infinite void. He didn't try to force it, didn't try to pour power into it. He just nudged it. He whispered to it with his mind. Glow. A pinpoint of soft, white light appeared in the air between his hands. It didn't flicker. It didn't spit. It just was. Pure, stable, and completely under his control. A slow smile spread across Leo's face. He had done it. Alara gasped, her quill frozen mid-scratch. Merlin's beard. The energy output is perfect. No waste. How? He stopped fighting himself, Strange said, a flicker of something like approval in his eyes. A minor success, but a critical one. Now, we need to apply the principle. The Glimmer Fiend is attracted to large, unstable paradoxes. We must study its behavior. To the library. The library at Hogwarts was usually a sanctuary of respectful silence, broken only by the rustle of turning pages and the occasional shushing of Madame Pants. Today, it was a place of quiet madness. The anomalies were worse here, in the heart of the castle's collected knowledge. A fourth-year Hufflepuff was trapped in a 5-second loop, repeatedly sneezing and then looking startled as his friends offered him a tissue for the 17th time. Shelves in the divination section were rearranging themselves according to tarot card predictions, creating an impossible, shifting maze. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and the unnerving, static-laced feeling of time coming undone. It's stronger here, Alara whispered, her eyes wide as she watched a ghost. Not one of the usual castle residents, but a translucent afterimage of a student who wouldn't be born for another 50 years. Walk through a wall. Why? Knowledge is its own form of order, Strange said, his eyes scanning the cavernous room. Centuries of facts, histories, and laws, all neatly bound and categorized. For a creature that feeds on chaos, this is a banquet hall. His gaze settled on the restricted section. The air around the gate was visibly shimmering, like heat haze off a summer road. And the main course is in there. Madame Pants lay slumped in her chair, not harmed, but caught in a temporal stasis, a single moment of sleep stretched into an eternity. Strange waved a hand, weaving a complex pattern of orange light that encapsulated her in a protective bubble. She'll be fine. Stay close. He unlocked the gate with another gesture, and they stepped inside. The sense of wrongness here was a physical weight. Whispers echoed from books that hadn't been opened in centuries, telling stories that had never happened. The shadows moved with a predatory intelligence. In the center of the aisle, hovering over a large, chain-bound grimoire, was the Glimmer Fiend. It wasn't a monster in any traditional sense. It was a wound in the world. It looked like a man-sized shard of broken glass, except each facet reflected a different possibility. In one pane, Leo saw the library in ruins. In another, he saw it filled with laughing students. In a third, he saw only a cold, star-filled void. The creature had no eyes, no mouth, no limbs, but Leo felt its alien attention as a profound, soul-deep chill. It was currently focused on the book below it, a faint, rainbow-colored mist being siphoned from the pages into its fractured form. The Codex of Impossible Truths, Alara breathed, recognizing the tome. Of course, it's a famous magical paradox. It contains spells that require ingredients that can only be created by the spells themselves. It's a logical Ouroboros. It must be delicious for that thing. The Glimmer Fiend seemed to sense their presence. The facets of its body swirled, and the whispers in the room grew louder. A spectral copy of Alara appeared beside her, its mouth opening to scream silently before dissolving into dust. Finch containment spells. Standard shielding arrays. Focus on temporal stabilization. Strange commanded, his own hands already alight with crackling mandalas. Vance, with me. We are not trying to banish it. We are going to make it an offer it can't refuse. Alara, back in her element, began to chant. Protego Horribilis. Tempus Firmar. A shield of shimmering blue energy erupted around them, but it buckled and warped as it touched the creature's aura. The Glimmer Fiend turned its attention to her, and the very words of her spell began to unravel. Protego Firmar Tempus. The incantation stuttered, the magic sputtering like a dying candle. It's feeding on the spell's structure, she cried out in panic. I told you, it eats rules. Strange yelled, his own shields barely holding against the tide of temporal distortion. Vance. It's feeding on that book's paradox because it's the most potent one in the room. You need to present it with a bigger, more chaotic, more unstable paradox. You need to offer it yourself. Leo's blood ran cold. Offer himself? Remember the lesson. Strange's voice was strained, the effort of holding reality together etched on his face. Don't be the dam. Be the flood. Let it see the chaos inside you. Not a single drop of water, Vance. Show it the whole bloody ocean. Fear warred with a terrifying, exhilarating sense of purpose. For his entire life, he had been terrified of this power, of the destruction it caused. He'd spent every waking moment trying to bottle it up, to hide it, to pretend it wasn't there. Now, the Sorcerer Supreme, the Headmaster of Hogwarts, was telling him to let it go. All of it. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and lowered the walls. It was not a gentle release. It was a detonation. The roaring, untamed sea of magic he had kept chained in the depths of his soul surged forth. It wasn't a spell. It had no form or function. It was pure, unadulterated potential. It was the energy of a star being born and a galaxy dying in the same instant. It was the impossible, living paradox of a boy with infinite power and no control. The library fell silent. The temporal loop stuttered and froze. Alara's faltering spell died on her lips. Even Strange's glowing mandalas seemed to dim. The Glimmer Fiend stopped feeding on the book. Slowly, deliberately, the thousand-faceted shard of space-time turned. It had no eyes, but Leo felt its gaze lock onto him, an undivided, primal focus filled with something that felt terrifyingly like hunger. It had been nibbling on a cleverly written riddle, and Leo had just offered it the concept of infinity. It abandoned the book completely. The shimmering haze around it intensified, and with a sound that was like tearing silk and breaking glass, it moved. Not through the air, but through reality, collapsing the space between them in an instant. It lunged, not at his body, but at his very essence. Leo's vision fractured into a million shards of light. He saw his own birth, felt the cold air on his skin for the first time. He saw himself as a withered old man, dying peacefully in a bed surrounded by faces he didn't know. He saw himself crowned the greatest sorcerer of the age, and he saw himself a broken squib, weeping in a dark alley in London. He was a hero. He was a villain. He was alive. He was dead. He had never been born at all. The Glimmer Fiend was inside him, feasting on the paradox of his soul. And as the world dissolved into an endless, screaming cascade of every moment that ever was and ever could be, Leo Vance learned the true meaning of his power. It wasn't just chaos. It was everything all at once. Chapter 4. The Unbreakable Flaw. The Headmaster's office was a wound in the heart of reality. It no longer resembled the circular, book-lined chamber Dumbledore had favored. Under Strange's tenure, it had become a cosmic observatory. The stone walls were veined with pulsating golden lines of eldritch energy, and the grand window behind the desk did not look out over the Quidditch pitch, but into the swirling, star-dusted nebulae of a distant galaxy. At its center, suspended in the air where a perch for Fox might once have stood, was the Eye of Agamotto, its dormant lids closed over a core of emerald light. Leo stood on a complex, glowing mandala inscribed on the floor, his heart hammering a rhythm that felt entirely out of sync with the universe. His Gryffindor robes felt like a costume for a part he hadn't yet learned. Opposite him, Elara Finch was a portrait of focused tension, her Ravenclaw robes immaculate, a thick, leather-bound tome clutched in her hands as if it were a shield. Her knuckles were white. "Recite the theory one last time, Mr. Vance," Headmaster Strange commanded. His voice cut through the low thrum of the chamber, sharp and devoid of patience. He wasn't pacing. He stood with the unnerving stillness of a predator, the cloak of levitation rising and falling slightly with an unseen current. Leo swallowed, his throat dry. "The Glimmer Fiend is drawn to paradox. My magic, it's a paradox. Immense potential energy, virtually zero kinetic control. It's an impossible equation. When I cast a spell, it's like reality is trying to divide by zero." "Adequate layman's terms," Strange clipped. "Miss Finch." Elara's voice was crisp, a stark contrast to Leo's nervous tremor. "The Glimmer Fiend doesn't consume magic, Headmaster. It consumes the inconsistency. The tear in space-time Leo created is a chaotic, unstable paradox. To lure the entity back through it, we need to present it with something far more enticing. A stable, deliberate, and perfectly formed paradox. A meal, not just a scent. And that meal is?" Strange's piercing gaze fixed on Leo. Leo took a breath, the air tasting of ozone and old parchment. "Scutum infragilis. The unbreakable shield charm. It's a newt-level spell designed to create a small, localized field of absolute stasis, repelling all external forces. But you will not be casting it on yourself," Strange continued, his tone a scalpel. "You will not cast it on Miss Finch or on me. You will cast it on the rift itself. You will attempt to protect the whole, to shield the damage. You will pour your power into an act of perfect, logical contradiction. To build a wall out of a void. To make a wound invulnerable." Leo's hands trembled. It was the most insane thing he'd ever heard. Traditional magic was about intent and effect. "You pointed your wand," said the words, "and intended to make a feather float. You didn't intend for the feather to both float and remain on the desk simultaneously. This was different. This was eldritch thinking, using the source code. The incantation is a focusing tool, Vance," Strange said, as if reading his mind. "The wand is a crutch. Your power doesn't come from them. It comes from your will imposing a concept upon the fabric of existence. You must want, with every fiber of your being, to achieve this impossible thing. You must believe in the lie you are about to tell reality." Elara stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "I'll be your anchor, Leo. The Glimmer Fiend's influence causes conceptual decay. As you channel, it will attack your focus, your memory of the spell, the very idea of a shield. I will provide the constants, the verbal components, the theoretical framework. You just need to be the power." Leo looked at her, truly looked at her. The girl who had once scoffed at his every miscast spell, who treated the rules of magic like immutable laws of physics, was now asking him to be the engine for breaking the ultimate rule. A flicker of something, not quite friendship, but a definite, shared terror, passed between them. He nodded. "Begin," Strange ordered. Leo raised his holly wand. It felt flimsy, a twig against a hurricane. He closed his eyes, shutting out the swirling galaxies and the Headmaster's intense stare. He focused on the memory of the rift, that sickening, non-existent shimmer he had seen in the charms classroom, a place where the world was peeled back. He pictured it in his mind, a tear in a piece of paper. Now, he had to mend it by making it stronger than the paper itself. He took a shaky breath. Scutum infragilis. The first pulse of magic was a disaster. It erupted from his wand not as a shimmering shield, but as a concussive blast of white light that sent a shower of sparks off the mandala. Elara flinched, and a stack of books on Strange's desk flew into the air, their pages fluttering like panicked birds before reassembling themselves neatly. A minor temporal distortion. The Glimmer Fiend was close. "Control, Vance." Strange's voice was a whip crack. "You are not a cannon. You are a needle. Thread the energy. Don't just let it explode." Leo gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. He tried again, focusing not on the raw power, but on the shape of it. He imagined it as a stream of liquid light, flowing from his core, down his arm, and out through the tip of his wand. He pictured the paradox, a shield of pure force, wrapping around a concept of pure absence. Scutum infragilis. This time it was different. A ribbon of silvery blue energy unspooled from his wand. It was unstable, flickering and spitting like a faulty wire. But it was a ribbon. It extended into the air before him, towards the focal point Strange had designated, a shimmering distortion that had become a permanent feature in the office, a constant reminder of Leo's failure. The Glimmer Fiend felt it. The very fabric of the room seemed to groan. The light from the star-flecked window warped, bending inwards as if being sucked into a drain. A ghostly image of the office from moments before flickered into existence, a temporal echo. In it, Leo saw himself just raising his wand, a phantom of the past coexisting with the present. "It's coming," Alara breathed, her eyes wide. "Maintain the channel, Leo." The silvery ribbon of Leo's spell touched the edge of the micro-rift. The contact was silent, but Leo felt a psychic jolt that rattled his teeth. The paradox was live. He was now actively reinforcing the very thing he needed to destroy. It was like holding two positive ends of a magnet together. Every instinct in his body, every rule of magic he had ever read, screamed at him to stop. The Glimmer Fiend manifested. It wasn't a creature of flesh and bone. It was a sensory avalanche. The air grew cold, not a physical chill, but a conceptual one, as the idea of warmth began to fray at the edges. The sound of their breathing started to play in reverse. The intricate patterns of the mandala on the floor writhed, the golden lines squirming as their geometric purpose was forgotten by reality itself. From the rift, a shimmering, oil-slick aurora of non-colors bled into the room. It had no shape, only effect. Where it passed, reality curdled. A section of the stone wall dissolved into a cascade of whispering numbers. The grand desk aged 1,000 years in a second, cracking and turning to dust, which then flowed backwards and reassembled into a fresh sapling. "Leo, focus." Alara's voice was sharp, cutting through the rising tide of insanity. "The incantation is your focal point. Don't look at it." But Leo couldn't help it. The Glimmer Fiend's presence was a siren song to his chaotic magic. It felt familiar. A kinship of broken rules. He felt his own power surging, wanting to break free, to join the glorious, beautiful chaos the entity was creating. His shield flickered violently, turning a furious red. "It's too much," he gasped, his arm trembling under the strain. "It's feeding on the spell, but it's feeding on me too." "That is the point, Mr. Vance." Strange's voice was unnervingly calm from behind him. "You are the bait and the hook. Now stop whining and pull." The Glimmer Fiend surged forward, its non-form coalescing around the paradoxical shield. It was a predator enveloping its prey. Leo cried out as he felt its influence directly, not on his body, but on his mind. The concept of his spell began to unravel. Scutum. What was scutum? A shield? What was a shield? A thing that blocks? What is blocking? The words in his head dissolved into meaningless sounds. "Alara," he choked out, his vision blurring. "Scutum infragilis," she yelled, her voice a lifeline in the storm. Latin scutum, shield. Infragilis, unbreakable. Its purpose is to create an impassable barrier through the application of a static magical field. The Arcanum principle states that focused intent defines magical form. You are the intent, Leo. You are the form. Her words were like solid ground beneath his feet. He clung to them, rebuilding the spell in his mind even as the Glimmer Fiend tried to tear it apart. He was the intent. He was the form. The impossible, contradictory form. He poured more power into the channel. Not uncontrolled, not an explosion, but a focused, steady torrent. The silvery blue shield intensified, solidifying around the rift, trapping the leading edge of the Glimmer Fiend's essence against it. The entity, driven by pure instinct, pushed harder, trying to consume the delicious, impossible meal. It was so focused on the paradox of the shield, it didn't realize the shield was now drawing it, inch by painstaking inch, back towards its source. "It's working," Leo grunted, the muscles in his back screaming in protest. "It's going back in." The spatial and temporal distortions in the room intensified. Ghostly figures flickered at the edge of Leo's vision. Students from decades past walking through the walls, the scent of Mrs. Norris's fur, the faint echo of a Sorting Hat song from a year he hadn't even been born in. The Glimmer Fiend was leaking temporal waste as it fought against him. Almost there, Alara urged, her own face slick with sweat. She hadn't cast a single spell, but the mental effort of keeping him anchored was clearly immense. Just a little more. With a final desperate surge, Leo shoved all the fear, all the frustration, all the hope he had into the spell. The unbreakable shield flared, becoming a blinding sphere of pure paradox. The Glimmer Fiend, unable to resist, was sucked completely inside the sphere, which in turn was dragged wholesale back through the microscopic tear it had come from. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The shield, the Glimmer Fiend, and the rift were all gone. Then the feedback loop hit him. The connection snapped. The colossal amount of paradoxical energy he had been channeling, now with no target, recoiled. It shot back up his arm, a searing bolt of pure wrongness. Leo screamed a raw, agonized sound as his own magic turned on him. His wand exploded in his hand, showering his wrist with splinters of holly and phoenix feather. The force threw him backward off the mandala, and his head hit the stone floor with a sickening crack. Darkness swarmed his vision. The last thing he saw was the golden geometric pattern of one of strange spells flaring to life, and Alara's horrified face as she rushed towards him. Leo woke up to the smell of antiseptic and dignity. He was in the hospital wing. The afternoon sun streamed through the high, arched windows, casting long shadows across the neatly made beds. His head was pounding with a dull, rhythmic ache, and his right hand was swathed in thick bandages. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced him back down onto the pillows. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Alara Finch was sitting in a chair by his bed, that same thick tome open on her lap. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, but her eyes were sharp. What happened? Leo croaked, his voice hoarse. You did it, she said, a note of undisguised awe in her voice. You pushed it back through and sealed the rift. The Headmaster, he called it weaponized incompetence on a cosmic scale. I think it was the highest compliment he's capable of giving. Leo looked at his bandaged hand. His wand was gone. A fresh wave of panic washed over him. My wand exploded, Alara finished for him. The magical backlash was significant. Madame Pomfrey says the nerves in your hand were trying to conduct positive and negative arcane charges simultaneously. She's never seen anything like it. He had done it. He had saved the school. But he had broken his wand, the one true connection he'd had to the magical world. He was back to being a liability. The thought was a cold stone in his stomach. So, I'm back on probation then, he mumbled, staring at the ceiling. Worse probably. Expulsion for destroying school property, starting with my own wand. Don't be an idiot, a new voice said. Headmaster Strange stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed. He wasn't wearing his formal headmaster robes, but a simple tunic, and the eye of Agamotto was tucked away. He looked less like a headmaster and more like the dangerous sorcerer he was. You did not fail, Mr. Vance. You succeeded in the most chaotic, reckless, and frankly impressive manner I have witnessed since I last looked in a mirror. He gestured to Leo's hand. Your wand was a limiter, a focusing tool for a type of magic that requires precision you do not possess. It was trying to force an ocean through a garden hose. It was bound to burst eventually. Leo stared at him, confused. So what am I supposed to do now? I can't do magic without a wand. Strange lips curved into a faint, unnerving smile. Oh, of course you can. Wizarding is not the only form of magic. It is merely the most popular brand. What you did in my office, the way you shaped that paradox, that was not spellcasting. That was reality bending. It was crude, messy, and almost killed you. But it was a start. He took a step closer, his eyes boring into Leo's. The Glimmer Fiend was a scavenger, attracted to a leaky pipe. Sealing that leak hasn't made the house secure. You've just rung the dinner bell. You've demonstrated that there is a power source at Hogwarts unlike any other, a nexus of pure, untamed potential. And a Glimmer Fiend is the least of the things that hunger for such power. A shiver that had nothing to do with his injuries ran down Leo's spine. "You are no longer on academic probation, Mr. Vance," Strange said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "Your old syllabus is irrelevant. Your education will now fall directly under my supervision. You are going to learn control. Not the flimsy control of wands and words, but true control. The control of a surgeon, not a sledgehammer." He turned to leave, the cloak of levitation sweeping dramatically behind him. At the door he paused. "Your first lesson is tomorrow, 6 a.m. The room of requirement," he said, looking back over his shoulder. "Don't be late. And Miss Finch, you should come too. Raw power is useless without a framework. He'll need a librarian." With that, he was gone, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Leo looked from the empty doorway to Alara, whose mouth was slightly agape. Then he looked down at his bandaged hand. It was throbbing, a painful reminder of his failure and his victory. He had lost his wand, the symbol of every wizard. But in its place, the headmaster was offering him something else entirely. Not a place within the world he had so desperately wanted to join, but a key to a world infinitely larger and more terrifying. He no longer feared his own power. For the first time, he was beginning to wonder what it was truly for.